Hello and welcome to Focus 54, your real feel of African issues. Today we're dedicated to the Southern African Development Community's Anti-Sanctions Day. I'm your host, Jeffrey Murimbechi, and in today's episode we'll explore the significance and the impact and the legal issues surrounding the Sanctions Day and the aim to deepen our understanding on issues surrounding this matter, how it affects you, how it affects governments, and how it affects the region as well as the global political landscape. Now, throughout this episode, we will dive through various perspectives and we'll engage with experts who are joining us to give you an insight on this discussion, and more of this will be coming through in the second segment. But for now, we'll take you through a roundabout view of what is going on in the African continent. And we start off with South Africa and Ghana, as the two countries on Monday signed a visa waiver deal, meaning that the government of Ghana and the government of South Africa have reached a visa waiver agreement to allow citizens from both countries to travel free. And we have always talked about free trade agreements, and we're starting to see bilateral agreements between different countries. And it starts off with these 1 and 2 countries doing that, and a couple of countries within SADC and other regions allowing that to happen. And still within that region, the Ghanaian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Regional Integration made confirmation through its social media platform. According to the post, an agreement has taken effect from the 1st of November. South Africa can reach the similar agreement with Kenya in January, and we hope that this message will be spread across Africa and will be able to trade between different regions. And this is happening in Kenya. Now, just looking at Kenya, surging sugar prices affect consumers in business, and sugar prices soaring in Kenya, causing widespread concerns among consumers and local businesses, as sugar is one of the most consumed ingredient in various products across the industrial space, and especially in consumption industry. Sugar will probably lead to some form of inflation, and that's something that we'll be following. And the below average rainfall and escalating costs of agriculture inputs in this country resulted in poor sugarcane harvests and forcing local sugar factories to temporarily shut down, meaning that there is scarcity. And this also comes back to the issue we have discussed on Focus 54, the issue of climate change. It is now starting to affect areas in East Africa. In Zimbabwe, we're already feeling the heat waves and sporadic rain, and these are some of the issues that we'll continue discussing on Focus 54. Now we go to Central Africa, where diesel prices have risen by 25% in October, marking another increase following a hike in January. Similarly, since July, the pump price of gasoline has surged up by 25%, and you can already tell what will happen in the economy. And authorities in Brazzaville attribute the soaring prices to recommendations made by the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, in 2019 under the Extended Credit Facility, the ECF, which provided financial assistance to the Republic of Congo, grappling a severe economic crisis and unsustainable debt of more than 80% of the GDP, meaning that they are always caught in that catch-22 situation. And we'll be following that news as well, because if you look at all the issues we are discussing on Focus 54, they're all interlinked all the way from climate change, sanctions, policies, free trade agreements. We are all linked as 54 nations. And that is all we have for you in this first segment. But don't go away. In the second segment, I've got two amazing political analysts, and we'll be diving deeper into the issue of sanctions, anti-sanctions, and to be specific, the SADC Anti-Sanctions Day. Welcome back to the second segment of Focus 54, and I did promise that I'll have political analysts on the show, and joining me is the first political analyst, Wilbert Mazarawetu. Welcome, Wilbert, to Focus 54.
It's great to be here, and thank you for having me.
I know we will be talking about, the SADC Anti-Sanctions Day, but, as we approach these deeper issues, for the purpose of those that are, viewing us for the first time, or maybe we might have a younger audience or those that need to be more enlightened, in layman's terms, what are sanctions?
Sanctions is a scenario whereby you've got two neighbors that are within the same area, neighborhood, and they happen to be having fruits which they sell to each other, and the other one stops selling to the other neighbor, saying that I've stopped selling my fruits to you, and you should stop selling to anyone else because your son is no longer playing football with my son, but your son perhaps might be playing another sport, which is tennis, but just for the virtue of you not subscribing to the sport that the other parent is subverting that son to, you end up just imposing something which they do not also subscribe to. So in layman's term, I believe that is a moral story to the issue of sanctions in a nutshell.
So it's when you put punitive measures on other nations because they don't subscribe to something that you believe in, whether it's policy or its ideologies. Now, that being said, what are the objectives and the significance of Anti-Sanctions Day, and how does SADC perceive the impact of sanctions on African countries?
The issue of sanctions in SADC really is about raising awareness. The long-standing objectives of SADC about fighting inflation, about development, about growth, about many other things in terms of technological advancement is being strickled and stifled because of this issue of sanctions. So SADC then came together to say 25 October should be the day when we stand together. Whenever we get a time as head of states, head of governments, whenever they're anywhere in the world, they're speaking about the illegal punitive sanctions imposed against member states and against other countries in Africa. The whole idea is about raising awareness, and it's about showing to the world that sanctions that are being imposed against certain countries like Zimbabwe, they are illegal, and they also undermine the issue of international law. They're also against the United Nations Charter. They basically are punitive measures which are made to make the economic scream of a certain country so that it can subscribe to the ideology of the people that are imposing sanctions on these particular countries.
So you're telling me that as a region in Southern Africa, we are all facing different versions of sanctions. Now, how have these impacted Africa, looking at the effects on Zimbabwe's economy, development, and the livelihoods of regular citizens like you and me?
I'll start to look at the economic sector in which how sanctions have affected the country. In Zimbabwe, you can tell that Zimbabwe has been affected in the agriculture sector. Much of the machinery and much of the components of agriculture are hugely invested and issues that requires huge foreign currency. So the buying and the funding of these initiatives has been stifled over the past 2-3 decades because of the issue of sanctions. The agriculture sector is the backbone of any country in terms of its food security. So by stifling the growth in the agriculture sector, it has brought about certain problems, unemployment, retrenchment, which is being caused by the issue of sanctions. Now, the banks that are supposed to be funding commercial farmers and farmers at large, such as agri-banks, such as the CBZ, they've been put in this sanction bracket in which they cannot do any particular transaction with other foreign banks. So that is hugely impacted the agriculture sector in terms of the economic livelihoods. And if you look at the livelihoods of people, there is a ripple effect in which it brings. So when the agriculture sector is affected, when the manufacturing sector is affected, and when the financial institutions are affected by the imposed sanctions, by the illegal sanctions, you then find that the people at large, they then are affected because they are then retrenched. There's then unemployment, and then there's the issue of people trying to do what they can do to go by not selling their commodities to the best environment, to the best market. We had farmers that were selling their horticultural products and produces as far as Netherlands. All those farmers are now affected in their horticultural produce because of these illegal sanctions. We've got banks that were supposed to be doing remittances in the diaspora, but the issue of correspondence banking from the banks locally, banking with the banks regionally, that also dies. So you see the macro effect of sanctions does not only affect an individual and an average person, it affects everybody in the corporate sector, financial sector, average sector, and a yet to be born child, because the environment and the institution that are supposed to be brought upon, they're being affected directly or indirectly by these illegal sanctions.
So I like the point you have mentioned, and I know a lot of the times we like to mention AMA 2000, but if you actually look at it, AMA 2000 were actually born into sanctions, and that's the only life that they've ever known. And this is why we're going to also pose some of these questions. Now, what is the perception within Zimbabwe Zimbabwe and the broader African community regarding the effectiveness and fairness of imposing sanctions on sovereign nations, like we did define Pukutanga Pepe to say, you know what, it's us imposing our will and punitive measures. Are there any concerns about potential humanitarian consequences of these measures?
The issue of sanctions in the African perspective, it has been understood in a wrong connotation or in the wrong path, in the sense that this is a selective imposition of sanctions. They impose on certain nations that they want, that do not subscribe to the ideology that they want them to subscribe. It is also about regime change. It is also about manipulating the issue of human rights. So the backbone of saying human rights violators are being sanctioned is the idea to give, you know, a reason to impose sanctions. But if you try to look at it in the issue of selectiveness, Zimbabwe as a country has not launched any rocket at any land. It has not managed to invade any inch of any land of anybody in Africa. If we look at the huge humanitarian crises that have been caused all over the world, all over Africa, there are many countries that should be, you know, circumvented and being subscribed to the idea of being imposed on sanctions. But Zimbabwe shouldn't be in that bracket. But you see Zimbabwe falling in that bracket because it is about the regime change. It's about the ideology that Zimbabwe subscribes to. It said, we want to take back our land, we want to give our people what belongs to our people, and by that, and not believing what tenets of democracy according to the Western imperialist or Western nation believes, it is then been put under pressure. But the selective approach and imposition of sanctions can tell you that it's not about democratic tendencies, it's not about the humanitarian issues. These are just areas where people are hiding and nations are hiding, while they do this thing of imposing sanctions on sovereign nations such as Zimbabwe.
It's a very heated topic. What we are going to do is we're going to take a short break and end off the second segment, and when we come back we'll talk about effectiveness of sanctions and how far the anti-sanctions movement has gone. So far you're watching Focus 54. My name is Jeffrey Murimbechi. Please stay tuned for more. Thank you for coming back to Focus 54 for the third and final segment of this heated debate. And we are talking about the SADC Anti-Sanctions Day and anti-sanctions movement in general in SADC and the rest of Africa. Because as we have discussed, these are punitive measures imposed on a certain country or a certain territory. I have a question that has been popping through. How effective have sanctions been historically in achieving intended goals? I know it's not new to Zimbabwe. And how can you provide examples of African countries that have been impacted by sanctions? And did it work, or it was just one of those things?
Well, before going across borders, I'll relate to the Zimbabwean society at large. Sanctions have not been effective in stopping Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe, according to the World Bank, has developed in the past 10 years in terms of its Human Development Index, in terms of its reduction in the cost of living. So you'd understand that these are real figures. You know, the inflationary gap has been fought over the past 5 years. These are changes in a positive way for a country that is fighting sanctions, for a country that is put under punitive measures, but it's managing somehow, some way to expand within its means to go further. And also, just to hit on that, you can see that the ruling party has managed to win elections over the past 2 years. The idea is just to say these sanctions, people have now come to understand the way sanctions are. They're supposed to be there for regime change, nothing else. We have had the special report from UN by the name Alena Dohan in 2021, in October 2021. She came and she was one of the people that raised that sanctions, they do not help. Sanctions, they affect average people in Zimbabwe.
People like you and me?
People like me and you. People in the streets. People that are living on minimum wage. So as you see in a bloc, an institution like the United Nations having a special report that has a whole conclusion to say sanctions are not helping, they're not assisting, they're just, you know, targeting few individuals, but the expense and the collateral damage is being felt by average people. So it simply means that the issue of sanctions to impose regime change has not been working, and it needs to be done away with because it is against the UN chapter. And SADC has stood firm to say each and every time Cyril Ramaphosa was at UN General Assembly, the president of Botswana, they have had the message to be vocal and to be heard that the imposed sanctions against Zimbabwe should be removed without conditions, and it should be removed immediately. And we've seen the President Emmerson Mnangagwa reiterating the same message across where he has gone, that the illegal sanctions imposed on Zimbabwe should be removed because they're not working, and they will never work because regime change agenda is not going to succeed in Zimbabwe.
And I think you might have just also touched on something that I was going to go to. Some have argued that sanctions are disproportional and they don't affect ordinary citizens. They affect the political leaders, the political elite, and things like that. How true is that?
The political elites are not affected by sanctions on more large. If you try to look at the issue of imposing embargoes and bans on the visit of the political elites in certain countries, that does not stop their well-living. They can still go to certain countries that they can afford to go with the certain benefits, with the certain lifestyle, with the same satisfaction that they would get in those countries that they are banned. They can go to certain countries. There's something called opportunity cost, in which is the best alternative for gone. So if you are banned in the UK, you can still go to Dubai and experience the same thing that you would have experienced in the UK. So there's nothing that you are doing to these political elites that is affecting them really. But what you are doing when you say you are imposing sanctions, you are affecting and you are imposing a ban or an illegal punitive measure which is going to affect an average income earning person in Zimbabwe. And by that time, when they realize the significance of that particular sanction, because if I can quote the words of Senate, a Senate in US, he said, if you want to separate the people of Zimbabwe from ZANU-PF, make the economy scream. So you can see clearly that it's not about the issue of violators, not about the issue of human rights, it's about the issue of making regime change, agenda change in Zimbabwe, using political actors and using these punitive measures, illegal sanctions, to impose that ideology on Zimbabwe.
We're back in studio. With the anti-sanctions movement, we now understand that it's affecting the everyday person. It's a way to squeeze and apply pressure so that some form of chaos for an agenda to come out. Now, critics argue that anti-sanctions day might divert attention from the internal government challenges, within member states. How can SADC strike a balance addressing external pressures and ensuring accountability and good governance within each member countries?
Well, on paper, SADC has to do its mandate as brought by its constitution and mandate. It has to make sure that its countries within the SADC bloc, they comply. They have to do what they are required to do. But SADC at large also needs to play a pivotal role in raising the issue and the awareness about sanctions within its member states, because this is where the failure of SADC as a bloc might be inhibited or might come through, where some particular member states fail to play or to contribute in the way that they should. They will fail to realize their potential due to the issue of sanctions. So at large, the bloc will fail its mandate because of particular nations within its bloc which is failing to realize its full potential because of the illegal sanction. So the role of governance is brought by SADC tackling the underlying ideology, which is the issue of sanctions. So once the issues of sanctions are removed, then the SADC could look at what can we get in terms of full potential of Zimbabwe. Can Zimbabwe trade its diamonds at the biggest diamond auction in Belgium? Yes. In the value addition, can we lead Zimbabwe to infrastructure development? Can we lead Zimbabwe to fight inflation? That can be done when the underlying reason of Zimbabwe failing economically or politically in some other ways is addressed. So I believe that SADC as a trading bloc need to look at all multifacets of countries, but also this underlying cause, what bringing these countries within the trading bloc to have stiffness in terms of growth, stiffness in terms of its contribution to the bloc for it to achieve its mandate and its goal.
And before we let you gentlemen go, Wilbert, as ordinary Zimbabweans, we've noticed that in other countries, Americans speak positively about Americans, Nigerians speak positively about Nigerians. What can we as Zimbabweans and other Africans do in the way we communicate and the things that we put online, to encourage and foster the message of anti-sanctions?
I think I would take it from the perspective of having a legal premise and a framework that will assist some other arrogant Zimbabwean or Zimbabweans that are in Zimbabwe and outside Zimbabwe for them to be brought to book and to justice in terms of them selling a wrong name or tainting the reputation of the country, and siding with the issue of punitive illegal sanctions being imposed on Zimbabwe. So the patriotic bill has to be speed up to process so that it can be brought into implementation. By doing so, we allow people to be patriotic about their nation. They would not advocate for something that is punitive to other people at the expense of them benefiting a political seat or a political mileage. We should not have people like Hope Wechingono going to summits speaking ill fates about how sanctions are not affecting anyone, when clearly people that are being affected do not have the same platform to speak about how they're being also affected by these particular individual illegal sanctions. So we need to have an act of parliament or law which then brings people to understand that everything that they say which is wrong and contrary to the law has consequences. By doing so, we are selling a better Buy Zimbabwe product, in which we are selling our country with the rightful image, and we are crying for the same voice that these illegal punitive sanctions imposed against Zimbabwe should be removed, and they should be removed today without any conditions.
And I like a man who stands by his word, and thank you very much for joining us. Two political analysts, one joining us virtually and one in studio. And in studio we had Wilbert Mozarawetu, and online on the anti-sanctions movement. That wraps up Focus 54 this week, but remember to catch up on this and many episodes on our Facebook page, that is ZBC News Online and ZBC TV. You can send your comments and we can review and get feedback from you. But for now, from us, it is a goodbye.